Picture this. In the stillness of early morning, an agent flips through a file under dim fluorescent light. It's not just any report. It holds concepts so disruptive, institutions felt threatened by their implications. The man behind these ideas. Gurdjieff, a thinker who challenged the very foundation of how we live our lives. He believed most people aren't really alive, not in the conscious, intentional way. Instead, we operate on autopilot, carrying out routines without question, like actors reciting lines we didn't write. Day blends into day, and though our eyes are open, it's as if we're sleepwalking through existence. Take a moment and think. How much of your day do you actually remember? You might get from home to work without recalling the drive. You eat, but don't taste. You talk but rarely listen, not truly. That's the state Gurdjieff warned about, a kind of internal slumber that keeps us disconnected from who we really are. He compared our condition to a man trapped inside a stage, play unaware of the set or the script. What if you're not the author of your own life? What if every reaction, every choice was pre-programmed by years of unconscious habit? But here's the twist. It doesn't have to stay that way. You can step behind the curtain. You can reclaim control, not by adding something new, but by finally noticing what's been happening all along. So how do we break free from this strange half-sleep that most people mistake for living? Turns out the idea isn't just philosophical. It lines up with some pretty mind-blowing science. Think about quantum physics for a second. There's this bizarre phenomenon where particles exist in several potential states until someone watches them. Observation changes reality. Sound familiar? Gurdjieff spoke of something similar, but on a personal level. He believed that until you begin noticing yourself, really paying attention, you remain stuck, bouncing between emotional patterns, mental loops, and physical routines you never chose. You're not choosing, you're reacting. And that reaction-based state, it's not just personal. There's a reason intelligence agencies kept an eye on these teachings. Imagine what might happen if thousands, maybe millions, suddenly snapped into awareness. Entire systems built on manipulation would start to crumble. After all, how do you control people who can see straight through illusion? And this isn't just about focus or productivity. It's about accessing parts of your being you didn't even know existed. When you stop living on reflex, new layers of life begin to reveal themselves, subtle, powerful, undeniable. Have you ever had a flash of recognition in a moment of silence? A strange feeling that you're finally seeing clearly for the first time? That's not a glitch. That might be a brief spark of the real you trying to break through the noise. There is a way to snap out of the trance, a method that doesn't require blind belief, just a willingness to see. But before we get to that, take a breath and let this sink in. Everything you assume about yourself, your thoughts, your identity, might be running on borrowed programming. The way you feel, the choices you think you're making, even how you define success, all shaped by a system that thrives on keeping you unaware. The first real shift starts with something deceptively simple: watching. Not the passive kind, but a razor-sharp kind of noticing. Gurdjieff called it self-observation. It's like flipping on a light in a room you've been stumbling through for years. Suddenly the patterns are clear. The emotional triggers, the habits, the roles, but all visible. Think of it this way. What if the life you're living was pre-written? Every reaction calculated, every move anticipated. Sounds like science fiction, but it's closer to reality than we'd like to admit. Just like characters in a simulation, we might be following a set of instructions handed to us by culture, education, media. Everything except ourselves. And here's where things get uncomfortable. This sleep-like state isn't just limiting your personal growth. It could be limiting the evolution of something far bigger. Gurdjieff believed that human unconsciousness didn't just trap individuals. It disrupted harmony at a universal level. He saw awareness not as a luxury, but as a necessity. Because without it, we're not just passive, we're predictable. And predictable minds are easy to influence, manage, and keep distracted. Now imagine if that predictability collapsed. If people started thinking for themselves, really thinking, the very foundations of control would be shaken. What if the version of you you've been living as isn't really you? Let's go deeper. That voice in your head, the one that says, "This is who I am." What if that identity was shaped by everything except your true essence? Gurdjieff called this construct the false personality. It's not evil, it's not broken, it's just borrowed, built from childhood, molded by expectations, reinforced by reward and fear. And here's the part no one tells you. It's incredibly convincing. You grow up being told how to behave, what's appropriate, what counts as success. Eventually, those layers stick. You stop questioning, you start reacting. You become the mask you were given and forget there was ever anything beneath it. Ever looked in the mirror and felt a disconnect, like you were staring at someone you barely recognize? That strange discomfort might be your real self trying to speak up through all the noise. Gurdjieff believed that the first crack in the illusion comes when you notice the mask, when you see the difference between what you feel and what you've been taught to feel. That moment of dissonance, that's where real transformation begins. And here's the good news. This false identity can be unlearned. The patterns that built it can be interrupted, not with force, but through something far more subtle: disidentification. It's the practice of stepping back, watching your own thoughts without grabbing onto them, experiencing emotions without letting them steer your actions. It's choosing to be the observer, not the puppet. Instead of saying, "I'm angry," you shift to, "I notice anger." That one change rewires how your mind processes emotion. You stop being your feelings and start being the one who notices them. It's not about suppression, it's about clarity. And that clarity, that's the beginning of freedom, because once you realize you've been living someone else's idea of who you should be, you finally get the chance to decide for yourself. There's a reason you feel torn between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. Gurdjieff didn't see humans as single-minded beings. He taught that we're made up of three distinct centers, each with its own type of intelligence: the mind, the emotions, and the body. The trouble is, most people rely on just one. Some overthink, others get lost in feelings, and many live entirely on instinct. The result? Constant imbalance. Picture it like a car with three wheels going in different directions. No matter how hard you push the gas, you're spinning in place, stuck. Now imagine what could happen if those systems worked together, if your thoughts were grounded in feeling and your actions followed both. That's alignment, that's power, that's clarity. Modern science is starting to echo what Gurdjieff proposed decades ago. Researchers now recognize the gut-brain connection, the emotional memory stored in the body, and how physical posture affects mental state. But Gurdjieff wasn't just pointing to the problem. He offered a path to integration. He designed movements, specific, intentional sequences that weren't about flexibility or fitness. They were about attention. Each motion demanded presence, emotion, and intellect all at once, a kind of choreographed awareness that pulled your centers into harmony. Doing these movements wasn't easy. They weren't meant to be. They were structured to challenge every unconscious habit your body had picked up. But those who committed reported strange, beautiful things: a quiet mind, a grounded body, and emotions that no longer ruled their choices. This wasn't about perfection. It was about wholeness. You already carry all three centers within you. The work is to bring them into rhythm, not with force, with presence, with practice, with the kind of awareness that turns everyday motion into conscious transformation. Not all paths to awareness look like meditation cushions or mountain temples. Gurdjieff introduced something radically different, a system built not for escape, but for engagement. He called it the fourth way. Unlike traditional methods that require retreat from the world, this approach demands presence within it. It doesn't pull you out of life. It wakes you inside it. This isn't about adopting robes or chanting mantras. It's about using your morning commute as a mirror, turning everyday conversations into awareness training, making the mundane sacred, not through rituals but through attention. The brilliance of the fourth way lies in its practicality. You don't need to disappear into isolation to grow. You just need to show up, fully, consistently, consciously. That means watching your reactions during an argument, noticing how your body responds when someone praises or criticizes you, feeling your breath as you wash the dishes, Every moment becomes material for self-discovery. But don't confuse this with convenience. It's simple, not easy. Real inner work asks for honesty, discipline, and the courage to witness what you'd rather ignore. The fourth way invites you to see your life as the classroom, the test, and the teacher, all at once. Those who walk this path often speak of strange shifts, new energy, sudden insights, a feeling like time stretches out, revealing textures they never noticed before. These aren't miracles. They're the natural result of living on purpose. Want to try it now? Focus on 3 things at once: your thoughts, your body, your emotional state. No judgment, no fixing, just observe. If that sounds difficult, good. That means it's working. This path doesn't offer comfort, it offers transformation. And once you've glimpsed even a second of it, it's impossible to go back to sleep. We're surrounded by screens, notifications, and endless distractions, all promising convenience, connection, and efficiency. But something's being lost. Look closer, and you'll see the price. It's not just attention, it's awareness. The ability to sit with a thought, to follow it without jumping to the next dopamine hit, is vanishing. Devices made to serve us are quietly training us to avoid silence, numb discomfort, and forget how to be still. Science backs it up. Our attention spans have shrunk. Deep thinking is giving way to shallow scanning. We're swapping presence for speed, and the cost is consciousness. Gurdjieff warned about this long before technology took over. He saw society drifting into mechanical living, people moving, talking, working, yet utterly disconnected. He didn't just see this as personal decay, he believed it was a collective regression. Not evolution, devolution. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The more we chase comfort, the more we lose the very thing that makes us human, the will to stay awake. Everything around us pushes for ease, but real growth, that comes from struggle, not mindless suffering, chosen challenge. He called it intentional difficulty, doing hard things on purpose, putting yourself in situations that demand presence, that sharpen the mind, that reconnect body and soul. It might look like turning off your phone for a day, sitting in silence when your instincts beg for noise, pushing through physical work instead of avoiding it, not because it's trendy, but because it reclaims something forgotten. In a world that rewards autopilot, waking up is an act of rebellion, and it starts with one choice: stop running from discomfort and start listening to what it's trying to reveal. There's a symbol, 9 points, 1 circle, ancient in appearance but packed with insight. To most, the Enneagram looks like geometry, but Gurdjieff saw something else: a living map, not just of personality, but of energy, change, and the hidden rhythms shaping everything from thought patterns to planetary motion. At its core, it reflects 2 principles: the law of 3 and the law of 7. The first explains how every movement, every transformation arises from the tension between 3 forces, not just action and resistance, but a third that reconciles. The second shows how energy flows in cycles, never linear, always spiraling, repeating until disrupted with intention. You don't need to memorize the math. You need to observe the patterns. Think of your life. How often do you fall into the same moods, the same arguments, the same self-sabotage? Those loops aren't random. They're structured, predictable. The Enneagram doesn't just describe them, it gives you the keys to exit. Gurdjieff taught that understanding your personality type within this framework wasn't about labels. It was about locating the blind spots, the emotional reflexes and survival tactics that run your life unnoticed. But the Enneagram goes further. It shows how to interrupt those cycles. By identifying the 3 forces at play in any decision, the push, the pull, and the bridge, you begin to move consciously instead of reacting. And when you learn to notice the intervals in your behavior, the recurring moments where energy drops or motivation fades, that's where real change becomes possible. Pair that with awareness. Add observation. And suddenly, what seemed like fate becomes a choice. This symbol isn't magic, it's a mirror. And once you learn how to read it, you'll start noticing the code behind your habits, your relationships, even the systems around you, all playing out in loops, waiting to be rewritten. You think you're one person, consistent, unified, in control. But Gurdjieff disagreed strongly. He believed we're not singular at all. We're made up of dozens, maybe hundreds of competing voices inside. Each one wants something different. Each believes it is you. And most of the time, we let them take turns at the wheel. That's why you set a goal and break it days later. Why part of you dreams big, while another quietly sabotages the plan. It's not laziness. It's internal chaos, a tug-of-war between identities all claiming the same body. Modern psychology now has a term for this conflict: cognitive dissonance. When your beliefs and actions don't match, stress builds. You feel stuck, confused, frustrated, but you're not broken, you're divided. And that division, it's draining your energy, keeping you stuck in a loop of indecision, self-doubt, and regret. Gurdjieff didn't just diagnose the issue. He offered a way out. He called it inner separation. It starts with one radical act. Stop believing every thought that crosses your mind. Step back. Watch. Treat your feelings like weather, something passing through, not something you are. Instead of "I'm angry," try "anger is present." That small shift changes everything. You move from being in the storm to observing it from the shore. This isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming free. Because once you stop identifying with every inner voice, you begin to recognize who's really speaking and choose which ones deserve your attention. From that point on, you're not reacting, you're directing. And when you finally bring those scattered parts into harmony, you don't just gain clarity, you regain your power. Most people believe they already have a soul, something given at birth, untouched and complete. Gurdjieff thought otherwise. He claimed the soul isn't something automatic, it's something that must be built, crafted, grown through deliberate inner effort. And for most, that work hasn't even begun. Think about how much energy you spend reacting, chasing, numbing. We live in fragments, body pulling one way, emotions another, thoughts scattered everywhere. To Gurdjieff, that disconnection was the root of unconscious existence, but it doesn't have to stay that way. He described a process, not mystical, not poetic, but practical. A method that fuses your mind, feelings, and physical body into a single integrated presence. When that alignment happens, something dormant begins to stir, the beginnings of a real, permanent self. Sound familiar? Meditation touches the mind. Exercise awakens the body. Emotional healing opens the heart. But most people jump between them without ever bringing them together. Gurdjieff's genius was realizing that integration is the missing piece. And he didn't just theorize, he created actual practices. His movements, carefully designed sequences, force you to stay alert. They demand attention, emotional depth, and physical precision all at once. No room for autopilot, no space for distraction. Each motion becomes a mirror. Every pause reveals what's usually hidden, the habits, the mental noise, the tension you didn't know you carried. Over time, this rewires the nervous system, forming new connections that bring clarity, stillness, and power. But movements are only the beginning. He laid out a full system: self-awareness, watch yourself without interfering; non-identification, separate your sense of I from passing states; presence, stay anchored in now through sensation and breath; discipline, show up daily, especially when it's uncomfortable; reflection, learn from what arises. Instead of escaping it, it's not glamorous, it's not instant. But those who commit report something rare, a deeper intelligence, a still center beneath the noise, and a steady fire that no longer flickers with every emotion. That's not inspiration, that's soul construction. There's a bigger picture most people miss. Your personal growth isn't isolated, it's woven into something much larger, a vast living system where everything affects everything else. Gurdjieff believed that waking up isn't just for your own benefit. The more conscious you become, the more impact you have on the world around you, and even beyond that. He saw humanity's sleep-like state as a kind of fuel, not metaphorically, but literally. Our negativity, our unconscious reactions, our emotional chaos, all feeding unseen forces we barely understand. He called it food for the moon. A controversial idea, sure, but pause and consider. What if your inner state actually shaped reality? What if unconscious behavior contributes to collective stagnation? Here's the powerful flip side. When you begin living with awareness, you're not just escaping that system, you're changing it. Your choices, your presence, your clarity, they ripple outward. Consciousness spreads. It's not about saving the world with one heroic act. It's about doing the real work up inside, moment to moment. So how do you start? It begins with watching, not casually, but with full honesty. Observe your actions, thoughts, moods, especially the ones you usually hide or excuse. No judgment, just clarity. Then comes separation, creating distance between who you are and what you feel. When anger arises, notice it without becoming it. When fear whispers, hear it without obeying. The next step is anchoring, using the present moment as your ground. Feel your breath, sense your body. Let the now pull you out of the loops of past and future. Consistency is what keeps the fire alive. No breakthrough lasts without repetition. Make the practice daily, even when it feels dull, especially when it does. And finally, integration. Reflect, review. Ask what the day revealed about your patterns. Growth isn't about stacking new ideas. It's about embodying what you've learned. These steps aren't New Age fluff. They're internal architecture, built brick by brick through choice. And the more people who commit to this process, the more the entire system begins to shift. Ever wonder why some truths are so hard to face, even when they're obvious? Gurdjieff had an answer. We're shielded by psychological armor, not walls we build on purpose, but invisible barriers that soften reality so we can stay comfortable. He called them buffers. And they're why people can live decades without ever confronting who they really are. Buffers make it possible to say one thing and do another without noticing the contradiction. They're what keep you in a job you hate, a routine you've outgrown, or a relationship that numbs you, all while convincing yourself everything's fine. They're not just mental. They're emotional padding, small lies we tell ourselves to avoid discomfort. But here's the twist. These buffers don't protect you. They trap you. They keep you from growth, from truth, from seeing what needs to change. And they're so ingrained that you usually don't even know they're running the show. So how do you cut through them? Gurdjieff offered a method that sounds simple but hits like a shockwave: the stop exercise. At unexpected moments, and especially during group work, he'd instruct students to freeze. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Everything paused. No adjustment, no reaction, just stillness. Why? Because in that frozen instant, your automation gets exposed. You see the tension in your shoulders, the script running in your head, the emotions swelling in your chest. You catch yourself in the act, not theoretically, but viscerally. And that's where transformation starts, because once you see the machine, you're no longer trapped inside it. Practicing this regularly begins to crack the layers. You notice how often you avoid feeling, how you rationalize, deflect, escape, and you realize it's not the world holding you back, it's the reflex to not look. Breaking buffers takes nerve. You'll feel resistance. You'll want to bail. That's how you know it's working. This isn't a feel-good method, it's raw, honest. But if you stick with it, real freedom begins. Most people see awakening as a personal milestone, a quiet internal shift. But Gurdjieff saw something far bigger. He believed that when an individual becomes conscious, it doesn't just change them, it affects the entire structure of existence. Because every unconscious mind is part of a larger system, and every awakened one disrupts that system's control. Now think about what that means. If enough people stopped living like machines, stopped obeying without questioning, consuming without thinking, reacting without awareness, the foundations of power would shake. Systems built on manipulation would collapse, not through protest, but through presence. That's why these teachings were seen as dangerous, not because they encouraged rebellion, but because they made people unprogrammable. Here's the twist. The conditioning you carry didn't come out of nowhere. It's embedded in your routines, your habits, the conversations you have, the content you consume. Every interaction shapes you, even when you don't notice. But the moment you begin watching, everything changes. You start seeing patterns, noticing choices you didn't make, reclaiming parts of yourself you forgot, and suddenly what once felt like reality starts to feel like suggestion. That's the power of observation. Not just passive awareness, but the kind that rewires your inner world and through it the outer one. Now imagine this happening everywhere, a wave of clarity rising across the planet, people unplugging from conditioning, tuning into something deeper, choosing how they think, feel, and act, instead of being told that's not a fantasy. It's already underway. The old ways are fading, a new consciousness is emerging, one choice at a time, one person at a time. And the question is no longer will it happen, it's will you be part of it.